Hello guys and gals, and this is part 3 of our reading of Pandora's Genes. It is a novel by Kathryn Lance. And as always, we are going to go over the copyright information. Which clearly says here, copyright 1985 by Kathryn Lance. All rights reserved. Anyways. Also, I have the author's written permission to read this book on my channel. So, yeah, there is that also. Anyways, in the last episode, then Zach was on his way to take Evie, I think it's pronounced Evie, back to the capital. And they're still a few days out, I believe, and they stopped for the night. On the second night, I believe it was. And we're just going to see what happens. Zach and Evie, so let's see. Don't also remember where we left off, but maybe I can find it real quick. Oh yeah, he was playing his feathered lyre. Okay. Zach purposefully remained where he was. The ground and the tree he was leaning against were bumpy and slightly damp, uncomfortable enough to keep him awake. For the same reason, he did not pull his cloak around himself until his teeth began to chatter. After a while, he got up and stretched, then laid more wood on the fire. It was becoming quite cold, and he extended his legs toward the warmth. It would have been tempting to stretch out just for a minute. Zach was startled by a sound. He leapt up instantly, but the fire was still burning brightly. He hadn't dozed more than a minute or two. On her bed of leaves, Evie was moaning and twisting. Zach relaxed. The girl was having a nightmare, and no wonder. He knelt by her and put a hand on her shoulder. "Wake up, Evie," he said. She started awake, eyes wide and terrified. "No," she cried. "Shh," said Zach. "It's only a dream." She pulled away from him, then seemed to come slowly awake, her plum-colored eyes beginning to focus. Zach watched as memories of the day came back to her, and then she looked up at him, less disoriented. "I was dreaming." "Yeah, that's right. It was a dream. Go back to sleep now." "But it's not a dream that I'm here. It's not a dream. What happened?" For a moment, Zach couldn't think what to say, but then he spoke in what he hoped was a soothing voice. "You're safe here. Nothing will happen to you. It's all right. Go back to sleep." He continued to stroke her shoulder and felt her begin to relax. After a moment, she lay back down. One hand brushed her face, then reached out for Zach's hand, which was resting on his knee. Very tightly, like an infant, she gripped the hand, then closed her eyes. For a long time, Zach sat with her, looking down at her face, now again peaceful in sleep. The principal had told his tax collectors to look for beautiful young girls, just between childhood and womanhood. There was no doubt that in many ways Evie was indeed a young woman, but at this moment, as Zach held her hand and watched her sleep, she seemed very much a child. The quality of the night began to change, and Zach could see by the movement of the stars that dawn wasn't far. Laying a last load of wood on the fire and checking that it burned properly, he at last let himself lie down and immediately fell into a dreamless sleep. When he awoke, full sunlight was shining in his eyes, and he knew that he had slept far too long. He sat slowly and saw that Evie was already up, and from the look of her, had washed. She was sitting by the fire, now ashes, and looking at him gravely. "Good morning," she said. "Have you been awake long?" asked Zach. "I thought you'd want to sleep." He sighed. He had hoped to get an early start just so he would be able to sleep through this coming night. He held in his irritation, touched by the girl's concern. "Thank you," he said. "I'm afraid I slept a little too late, though. We'll have to breakfast quickly." I already had some of the bread Mother sent. Good, said Zach. Let's get started then, and we can stop in a few hours and finish the rabbit. He didn't feel like eating now. His stomach was queasy, and his head ached, as if he had too much to drink. The fly bite on his forearm had begun to itch badly. He quickly loaded the mount, and they set out, riding hard, not talking. At midday, they stopped in a shady area where Evie ate most of the remaining meat, while Zach drank horn after horn of water. Aren't you going to eat? She asked. Perhaps later. I'm not hungry now. She looked concerned. Do you feel all right? I'm fine, Zach said. Just a little tired. He smiled at her. The afternoon sun was hot, and as they rode, Zach realized how exhausted he was. He'd had a hard ride of almost 2 weeks to the brewer's house. This return trip would take even longer with the girl. Zach had to admit to himself that he felt his age, and the many fights he'd been in, and the missions he had undertaken for the principal. His knowledge of the area was not exact, but he knew that they were not far from the low foothills, which were packed with small caves. If they reached the hills before dusk, he could sleep through the night safely. A large fire in the mouth of a cave would still be glowing by morning, and no bat would fly directly across a light, however dim. After a good night's sleep with an early start, they might even be out of bat country by late tomorrow. The rest of the journey would be far less trying, because they would follow the river east and south along the principal's road. They continued to ride, and still the foothills did not appear. Zach's exhaustion had grown worse. The effort of guiding the mount down steep paths, of holding Evie in front of him, had made his arms feel so heavy that they seemed no longer a part of him. His head throbbed with each step the animal took. For a moment, he considered stopping short of the foothills and again sleeping in the open. Perhaps he could manage it just for this one night. Zach jerked himself upright. He had been dozing. Something was very wrong with him, and he knew it was essential now to reach the caves. Evie sensed his alarm. She turned and looked up at him. Maybe we ought to stop soon, she said, sounding worried. We will, he said, just a little farther. Once again he started to fall asleep and only pulled himself back to consciousness when the mount stumbled on a rock. He was beginning to feel frightened for himself and Evie if the foothills did not appear soon. What's that? Said Evie. Zach looked in the direction she was pointing and almost wept with relief. Half buried by dirt, rocks, and vegetation, he recognized the unnatural angles and reddish-brown color of dead machine bodies. There were many such burial grounds scattered throughout the district, and almost always some of the bodies were large enough and well enough preserved to serve as shelters. Indeed, the same plants and animals lived in them as in natural caves. Although Zach wasn't superstitious, he preferred to avoid machines, but had used them when necessary. The bodies were buried just across a shallow stream. Zach dismounted and walked across the stream. Evie followed him. These are dead machines, aren't they? Asked Evie. She sounded odd. Yes, said Zach, and thank the Dinas you found them. He picked up a large bare branch and approached the twisted mass of rock and metal. The first body he came to was large enough, but badly damaged, and in any case it was marred by several large openings, too many to afford protection from bats. The next was suitable, but already occupied by snakes, as he discovered when he thrust his branch into it. At last he found a machine body that had only one large, jagged opening in. It was also unoccupied, at least for the present. Zach leaned against the hill and held the machine body for a moment, hoping his strength would return. Evie, he said, please help me bring firewood up here. I'm too tired to tend fire in the open tonight. She put her hand to her mouth. But wild Dinas live in machine bodies. Nothing lives in machine bodies but snakes and rabbits, said Zack, irritated. That's just a superstition. I'll make the fire tonight, Evie said. I'll stay awake. We're going to sleep here now. Help me gather wood. He walked back toward the stream and began selecting branches. Each time he bent over, his head felt heavy and his vision blurred. He handed his load of wood to Evie. Take this up there and put it inside the machine body. She accepted the load but began to cry. Please, she said. I'm scared of the Dinas. Do as I say, he bellowed. Don't be such a child. Evie looked shocked and began to cry harder, but she took the wood to the machine body and quickly thrust it inside. Then she returned and once again followed Zack's instructions. The last load he took himself. Now all that remained was to unload his things from the mound and bring them back. Then build a fire. He would sleep and by morning be himself again. Zack stood up and started to walk down towards the stream, but his legs refused to cooperate. He felt his body falling back against the harsh earth, the metal wall. As he slid toward the ground, he saw Evie looking at him in alarm. Evie, he said, there's something wrong. But the sound that came from his mouth was not words, and he had a moment of panic before everything faded away. Chapter 4. Zack dreamed he was sliding down an endless mountain, his hands unable to get a purchase on rock or limb, his skin scraping from his body bit by bit. At last he came to the bottom and lay there, pebbles and pieces of broken wood sticking into him at throat, belly, and thighs. He tried to roll away from his torment and woke. At first he didn't know where he was and thought that he was still dreaming. Gradually his eyes focused and he saw shadows jiggling purple and gray. He groaned and rose on one elbow. He was inside a very small cave, the mouth of which was guarded by a badly smoking fire. Beyond the fire all was dark. It was night. He tried to sit up and groaned again, then fell back. Evie's face, small, pale, and frightened, was above his. I thought you were dead, she said. Now it came back to him, and he realized he must be inside the machine body he had found with a fire guarding him from bats. However, Evie had brought him in here and had kindled the campfire. How, he did not know. Why, he could not imagine. He tried to answer her, but his mouth and throat would not obey his command. She understood. I think you have the fly fever, she said. It comes from the green flies that live in the woods. We usually get it as children, and then we never get it again. I never saw a grown-up person have it. Zack understood her and again tried to answer, but all that came out of his mouth was groans. You can't talk when you have it, Evie went on. It does something to your mouth and tongue. When you fell before, I thought you were dead, and then I saw you were breathing. I decided to bring you in here, in spite of the wild Dinas. You're so big, but I kept pushing and pulling. I'm sorry if I hurt you. Zack understood that she was talking because of her own fears. He wanted to reassure her, but could do no more than look at her, and even that was an effort. It took a long time to get you in here, she went on, and by that time it was getting dark, and I was afraid to go back out. So I took your flint and metal and made a fire. I never realized before how hard it is to make one, she sighed. I think it's nearly dawn now. I've been awake the whole time. I'm glad you're alive. Zack cursed himself for being unable to answer, to thank her. She had saved his life, a man she could have reason only to hate. He turned his head in humiliation and frustration. After a moment, he felt her cool hands on his forehead. I'll bring you water as soon as it's light, she said. I know you must be thirsty with the fever. After another moment, she went on. I hope you don't mind my talking to you. I was talking to you even when you couldn't hear me. I kept thinking about the wild Dinas and the bats. I wondered what I'd do if you died. I thought I might take your mount and go home, but I don't know the way, and I don't know how to ride. If you want to go to sleep, blink your eyes 3 times, and I'll be quiet." Zack turned his head back to her and summoned all the strength he had to keep from blinking. "I've been thinking all night," Evie said. "I know that you have to obey the principal, and I have to obey my mother and father. With my first father dead, there was no other way to get money, but they wouldn't tell me what was going to happen to me in the capital, and they tied me up so I wouldn't run away. Why did they do that? Where would I run to? I was so afraid yesterday. Now that you're awake, I feel safer. When you told me not to be afraid, I believed you. You want to go to sleep, don't you?" Zack fought to keep his eyes from closing, but his eyelids flickered, and once again he slept. When Zack next awoke, the machine body interior was lit by the reflected sun, revealing strangely shaped twisted bits of rotten wire and metal embedded in the walls. After a moment he remembered all that had happened. Painfully he turned his head and saw that the little cave was empty. For a moment he felt a stab of fear that Evie had left him, that he would die here alone and in thirst. Perhaps he thought he could drag himself to the stream to drink and then back, but he knew he didn't have the strength to gather more wood. And in any case, if Evie was gone, so were his mount, his weapons, and his provisions. He heard a scraping noise outside and imagined that fox cats had scented him and come to finish him. Better that he thought than a slow, lingering death of paralysis and thirst. Evie's face appeared above him. "You're awake," she said. "I went to sleep right after you did. I think it's about midday. I've been gathering wood for tonight. Your mount is all right. I've seen her eating grass by the stream, but she won't let me get near her." Zack tried to explain how Evie could approach the skittish mount, but all that came out was the strange moan of last night. "I wanted to bring water," said Evie, "but your horn is still on the mount." Zack felt tears of despair start to his eyes. His thirst had become a torment, and he knew he would die if he could not drink. Perhaps a girl could help him get to the stream. "When children get the fever, it usually lasts just a day or two," Evie was saying. "I hope it's the same for you. I know you have to have water. The fever burns it all off." She took a deep breath and said, "I'll be right back." Zack watched her go and tried to rise and follow her, but fell back weakly. After a few minutes, she reappeared, an expression on her face. She knelt, brought her face close to his, and then Zack felt her soft lips upon his. Her mouth parted, and he felt water trickles against his own. He understood what she was doing. He opened his mouth and let the water drip in. Painfully, he swallowed. When Evie's own mouth was empty, she returned to the stream and repeated the process again and again until he nodded that he had had enough. "I'll bring more water in the afternoon," said Evie. Do you feel better?" Zack tried to convey in his expression how grateful he was, but the paralysis of his tongue and throat seemed to have spread to his face. For the rest of the day and into the long night, Zack lay helpless. Twice more Evie came and gave him water, though he was still tortured by thirst most of the time. In the few minutes that he was able to think clearly, he wondered how and what she was eating and what would happen to her if he died. She did not know this area. She could not ride his mount. He must stay alive now for her sake. As suddenly as Zack had fallen ill, he began to recover. When he awoke the next morning, he had little trouble focusing on the walls of the machine cave, and he realized that the throbbing in his head was gone. He stirred, and almost immediately Evie knelt over him. Before she could speak, he moved his lips and muttered weakly but intelligibly, "Feel better." Evie's face relaxed with relief. Then it is like with the children," she said. "You'll be all right," she went on gravely, almost like a parent lecturing. "You probably won't feel quite right for a few more days." Zack took a deep breath and felt stronger still. After a moment, he spoke again. "Evie, I owe you my life. I couldn't have left you to die," she said. "I think," he went on, slowly but distinctly, "that if you had not taken care of me, both of us would have been lost. I thank you, and I swear I will pay you back." By late that afternoon, Zack was so much better that he was able to make his way to the stream and drink his fill. With some embarrassment, he cleaned himself and his clothes, then approached the mount and took from her his sword, the remaining food, and his drinking horn. Exhausted, he lay against the wall of the cave and watched while Evie prepared a fire and food for both of them. The following morning, Zack felt almost himself again, and though he was still weak, he thought he could travel a few miles. When he suggested moving on, Evie began to protest that he was not yet well, but he persuaded her that they were better off finding a larger natural cave. They had been here enough days to have attracted attention from humans or animals, predators, if such were about. Besides, he needed to feel action to stir his brain, for things had changed irrevocably, and he had to think. They did not travel far. Zack was much weaker than he had expected, and the exertion of getting on his mount was enough to leave him trembling. Evie was solicitous, glancing at him from time to time and doing what she could to aid in guiding the mount. In any case, there was little difficult riding to do, as they were soon in the foothills, where the paths were slow and winding, leading down towards the river plain. At midday, Evie insisted that they take a break for lunch. Then she suggested that perhaps they should make their camp here for the night. Zack made only a token protest. Then they had come upon a large enough natural cave it would be easy to protect from bats, and Zack could have a long night's rest to heal his still weak body. While Zack sat at the mouth of the cave and dug a small pit for the fire, Evie brought in wood. They worked in silence, companionably, as if they had been traveling together for years. They ate the last of the food Evie's mother had given them for dinner. Zack would have to hunt tomorrow, which would slow their journey, but it would also give him more time to think. They were not far from the river, and a decision would have to be made soon. The food made Zack very sleepy, and he lay down near the back of the cave, his cloak half covering him. Evie was wide awake and wanting to chatter, but Zack was too tired to respond in more than grunts. Finally, she asked him, "Could I try to play your lyre?" "Of course." Gingerly, she pulled the leather case from Zack's large pouch and slipped out the lyre, which was held in both hands before the fire. Looking at the polished wooden frame and the delicate but strong strings, each of which ended in what seemed to be hundreds of iridescent fronds, she plucked one string and almost dropped the instrument as it resounded with a melancholy, lingering note. She sighed aloud and picked another string, then three together. On her next attempt, one of the strings broke with a whining snap. "Oh, Zack," her voice was filled with distress. Zack smiled. "Don't worry, Evie, it happens all the time. Bring it to me." He reached into the bottom of his pouch, where he always kept one or two feathers coiled for such emergencies. While she watched, he removed the damaged string and replaced it with a whole feather, first scraping the scales from the flexible shaft with his fingernail, while he tightened the bone peg holding the new string, testing its tone. As he did, she held the broken one up to the firelight, causing the fronds to move delicately with her breath. "May I keep this?" she asked. Zack laughed. "Of course. In fact, let me show you a trick I learned as a boy." Setting the lyre aside, he took the feather and deftly braided its many fronds in and upon themselves, then twisted the whole into a circle, weaving the ends into the braids. "There you are," he said, "a feather bracelet." Evie slipped it on her slender wrist and held out her hand and admired the way the bracelet's many shining colors gleamed in the light. "Do you like it?" he asked. "It's the most beautiful thing I ever saw," said Evie. "Thank you." Zack smiled to himself. He picked up the lyre again and after a final adjustment, played a chord. "As good as new," he said. He replaced the instrument in its case and yawned. "When you feel better, will you play more songs for me?" Evie asked. "I'll write one for you," he said. "Would you like that?" She nodded, her pupils so wide that her eyes appeared black. The sounds of the lyre seemed still to fill the cave. She ran her fingers over the soft surface of the bracelet, then moved to the side of the cave opposite him and lay down on the blanket beneath her cloak. "Good night, Zack," she said. "Good night, Evie." This looks like, okay, what? Zack was pulled awake by what seemed the next minute. "Zack," said Evie, shaking his shoulder. "Wake up. There's something in here with us." Still groggy, he sat up. "What are you talking about?" Silently, she pointed upward and to the right. Zack followed the direction of her finger and saw a point of light. He refocused and realized that it was a star, that the top of the cave opened into the above air. The opening was far from the protective fire. He whispered, "Why do you think something is in here?" "Because I heard." There it is again. Now Zack also heard the whirring of wings above them and the high-pitched squeal of a hunting bat. "Evie," he whispered urgently, "get under my cloak. Cover yourself completely. Now," he added as she hesitated. Evie burrowed under his cloak while Zack moved towards the mouth of the cave. Why had he decided to sleep so far from the fire? And we'll probably find that out in the next episode. We have been reading Pandora's Genes by Kathryn Lance. If you like this book, I'm sure it's probably still for sale, and you can probably get yourself your own copy of it. But yeah, if you like this content, make sure you like and subscribe, ring the bell so you know when I upload. Also, if you want to support me in any way, all that information will be in the description below. As always, thanks for watching, everyone, and have a great day.